This is episode 13 of the Ripples podcast, and unluckily, you've got me, Samuel Levy.
Hey Sam, how's it going, mate?
Hello.
Not too bad.
You know, I have known you, Samuel, for a number of years, and I've only ever known you in all of your online communications to show yourself as Samuel Levy. So I'm not inclined to abbreviate that, but do you mind if we call you Sam?
I
Or do you
actually
prefer?
prefer Sam.
Okay.
I don't know why I became Samuel in online stuff. I think it's just people kept referring me to me as that, but I actually prefer Sam.
Okay. So I can call you Sam. That's fine after all these years that we've known each other. Probably since it has been a long time, like before even the first Laracon you were kicking around
Yeah, I think
in
probably 2017 or 18 when I joined the PHP Australia Slack and
mm,
started really annoying people.
yep, it sounds about right.
Yeah.
7 years, 6 years, something along those lines. So Samuel, we've got you on here to talk a little bit about your journey. You've spoken at Laracon a few times, Laracon AU a few times rather. You've been in the PHP Australia Slack community, I suppose, for a long time.
Yep.
You work for yourself, which you've been doing for an even longer period of time. So I suppose why don't you start with telling us a little bit about yourself and what you do before we get into some of the horrors that you always find yourself getting involved in.
I like to call myself a code bunker because that seems less pretentious than software engineer or webmaster, um, while also still seeming a bit weird and pretentious. um, I mostly do PHP, but I've got a background in hosting and Python and bit of this, bit of that. I just kind of do whatever comes my way. I've been freelancing. I started freelancing about 13 years ago, and then that moved into running my own little consultancy, which I've been doing ever since.
And
Yeah, cool.
your consultancy is primarily rooted in PHP, but you pick up basically whatever's going to sustain yourself.
Yeah, so my preference is PHP and Laravel, just because I don't hate myself that much. Um, but there's always, a bit of WordPress knocking around, and then every now and then someone comes to me and they've run out of options elsewhere. So I kind of end up taking on all sorts of things like Python, Kotlin, Go, Rust occasionally. But I've had one person come to me with Rust, and I didn't last very long on that before I went, yeah, you probably want to be paying someone who knows the language more than I do. But yeah, it's a kind of I take what I get, so long as the clients are paying and understand that I may be learning as I go. That's not a big deal.
Nice.
So I think I first met you at one of the early Briz Laravel meetups.
Yeah.
And I haven't been very active in the PHP Slack channels, so at the time didn't know too many people. And I got a ticket on our GitHub where we take talk submissions for running Laravel inside of WordPress.
Larapress, yes.
So part of me was like, this is crazy, and I don't want any part of it. But I think we ended up putting you on the billing out of some morbid fascination with how you would go about getting something like that working. So, and having now known you for a number of years, I've come to realize that isn't even probably the craziest thing that you put together. I'm always interested to know what it is that motivates you to try and mix these things up, and whether or not they do in fact have any legitimate commercial usefulness, or whether it's just purely a intellectual exercise, like the mountain is there to be climbed kind of thing.
For the most part, especially when it comes to splicing WordPress and Laravel, things like that, there's a underlying feeling of it's all PHP. So there's a certain amount of me that I've worked with so many hacky systems, so many legacy systems, so many homegrown frameworks that I've got a pretty good understanding of how all of the things fit together. And I'm always up for a good code dive to dig in and see how something actually works, um, which always leads me to going, does it have to work this way? Um, most of the things I would love to say have no commercial use. However, almost every single dumb experiment that I've done, I have then told people about it, and someone somewhere has gone, "Oh yeah, we figured we've been doing that for our production system. How did you sort this out?" And it just makes me go, "Oh, that's right. All code's terrible."
As much
Yeah.
as we can look at, we often put out the best versions of ourselves into the world, not just in code, but people often only see the successes. It's not all the work that goes up to it, which we've spoken about on this podcast, the overnight success that took 10 years to build.
Yeah.
And so, you know, a lot of the stuff that we see in the Laravel community is actually the best of what we have. We polish things and we put the best versions of our code out there that, we review and make sure it all works and it looks great and whatever else. But the reality of our roles as developers, as engineers, whatever you want to call ourselves, is, that there is a lot of dank and disgusting code out there in the world that is running real businesses.
Yeah. That's
It does make you wonder, like when you look at your phone or a major website, how many of these things where you can't see the source code are they just held together with hopes and prayers and strung up on layers and layers of legacy nonsense?
yeah. Yeah, there's a lot of that. And
Yeah, I suspect it's more than
through
you
my
think.
career, I have encountered quite a bit of those bits and pieces where I go, "Oh, I thought this was a good company that had stuff together, and this is how it runs." And then you question it, and everyone's like, "No, this works. Don't touch it.
Yeah.
It's all."
Yeah,
So,
it's not wrong. It's not wrong if it works and it's making money.
well, yeah, that's the thing. It's one of my biggest issues when I was way back in agency land is I kept trying to build perfect systems. I was very much a perfectionist and I would over engineer things. And one of the biggest lessons I had to learn from my agency boss is the business doesn't care if it's perfect, the business cares if it's making money. So there's a certain amount of pragmatism which can be hard to pull in. But then again, also being an agency, we had to maintain things that that we'd forgotten about. That a lot of projects that you would do, and then 6 months later there'd be a change or an update or something like that. So you had to be able to quickly come back in, jump in, figure out what the heck's going on, and maintain it. So it led to a very kind of structured way of building things, which was easily maintainable, but easy to drop and forget and then learn again. I avoided frameworks for a very long time because every single one that I could see was adding, or at least PHP frameworks. Every single one was adding complexity around the things that PHP already did, but quicker and faster. But they weren't adding any actual reliability features. And Laravel was the first framework that I encountered that actually made me look at PHP frameworks and go, "Oh, okay, I could actually use this. It is actually providing value." Before that, it was like Code Igniter and Cake and things like that that were, yeah. But,
Yeah, I mean, you trade off. I mean, there are definite trade offs in picking a framework. Yeah, but a really simple case of that in Laravel is array functions versus collections. Array functions
yeah,
are objectively faster. They objectively perform better. Whether or not that matters is a question for the problem that you're trying to solve. But there has to be enough sort of utility and ergonomics and developer experience in going the other way to offset the performance reduction that you get from moving that way. And
yeah,
I think in 9 out of 10 cases, whenever Laravel touches something, they kind of get that. They kind of give you a lot more leverage as a developer to be able to produce solutions faster,
yeah.
rather than just
Oh,
putting a bit of syntactic sugar around something that doesn't necessarily need to be there.
well, just yesterday I ran into that. I had an array that I needed to go through and just do an array map on, and I went, because it was just an array, I reached for the PHP standard array map and then went to ask for the key and realized the standard PHP array map doesn't give you the key as a second parameter. So I had to switch to the array helper to map through, and that would give me the key and the value. It's just little bits and pieces of, yes, the standard PHP ones are going to be faster. It's going to use less memory, but sometimes, yeah, there's a tiny little bit sort of usability niceness around them that,
Mm.
that
It's the
definitely
accumulation. It's the accumulation of those tiny little improvements in developer experience that ultimately add up to. I'd imagine this is critically important for someone in the sort of agency and consulting space, is that every little increment of efficiency that you can gain is less work you have to do for your billable hours. And in theory, charge the same amount of money, but work fewer hours, deliver a better result, deliver a more maintainable result, faster for the client than you otherwise would.
Yeah, it can produce more value, and the really important part is I can build these things and trust that when I come back to it, I can understand what is happening.
Mm.
I know you and I have had discussions about code comments before, Greg. I know your company has an opinion about them,
Mm.
but I still think like code comments are very useful. There's been a lot of discussion about, does AI get rid of the need for commenting your code, and I don't think it does. It gets rid of the need to write bad code comments, because bad code comments just explain the thing that it's doing. And I totally agree with you. If you need to comment what this thing is doing, then you haven't written it clear enough to understand what it's doing without the comment. The comments should exist for why, or to expose things which are not explicitly clear from the off. Comments should be there for intention, the intended use of this thing, as opposed to the exact concrete, this is what it does. And
yeah, I mean, if you've got a variable $A and then a comment next to it saying currency, just make the variable $currency and yeah, just for clarity's sake, we don't actually have it. There is a bit of a meme that my company has a firm policy against comments, and that you'll be fired if you use them. That isn't, in fact, the case. We do suggest that in most cases a comment should be seen as an apology for not writing something clear. Now, there are definitely cases where you simply can't write it clearer. You can't extract a method. You can't give something a name. Limitations of the framework, limitations of the language, limitations of the business problem that you're trying to solve. And in those cases, we will dutifully make our apology in code for doing that. Yeah. But the opposite of that is that I have found, and my experience has been, that when people comment on code, when you don't have that kind of forcing function, that people will forego writing things clearly because they can just write a paragraph of prose that explains the thing that they're trying to do. So it's really just a way of trying to, force people to say, could you write this in a way that you could delete, that you could remove the comment that you've added? I mean, informational comments like doc blocks and, explanations as to how something might interact with something else, examples of how to implement. If you're writing library code, putting an example inside of a comment on how you would implement it is they're all valid, very valid uses of that.
Yeah, there's a few factors there. One is if you're documenting the if you're documenting the behavior of a function or something like that. One, people will trust that whatever you've documented is correct, and then get frustrated when it's not actually correct. And two, people, well, like the functionality of something will change. It definitely will change. So there's very little code that I've seen which gets written and then 15 years later, actually, I would love to say there's very little code that I've seen that hasn't been touched 15 years and is still running. There's a lot of it out there, but it should have been redone. But yeah, the functionality of things or the behavior of things will change. And if you're writing a code comment which describes the behavior of a thing and people never update that, then it's going to be bad documentation.
Yeah, they have to document. They have to write the same thing twice, and the chances that they will do that is relatively low.
But I find if you write comments that describe the intention, like the intention and the reasoning of why this thing is, it actually has a side benefit of it makes people not want to make functions do too many things. If you have a function that says this multiplies the x 8 times, then someone goes, well, we need it multiplied 9 times, and they do that and they don't update the comment, then you've got junk. But if you've got an explanation of this function provides or adds the multiplier for X feature, then people aren't going to go, oh, okay, I'm going to use this function just because I happen to need a thing multiplied 8 times, and now it's a code bug that someone changes it because X feature requires a change, and all these other places have used this weird function which was never intended for that. So it helps people to understand, is this safe to use outside in a different area of the code? And it also helps people to go, hey, maybe I shouldn't be changing this here because that's adding functionality which isn't listed as this is the intention of this function.
All right, I'm going to steer the conversation away from code comments if we can, and try and get a little bit back on track.
Okay, no comment.
I mentioned at the start of the podcast that you have spoken at 3 Laracon AU now, all of them, or two of them, back to back.
I didn't make it to the first one. I unfortunately didn't know it was on then.
Michael didn't have his advertising game sorted at that point.
Not at all.
So,
I've learned the subtle art.
Yeah. Well, one of the things I figured out at some point, being a solo contractor who doesn't get to go to the big expensive conferences, is if I want to go to conferences, the best way to go is to talk at them. Then people will often pay for me to go there, or at least pay me for my flights and accommodation, and I get to go to a conference which was otherwise out of reach for me.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I started submitting to conferences. Just started with local meetups to begin with, just talking about random bullshit that I'd encountered. Then WordCamp, which is a larger conference for WordPress, but still very localized. They're run by communities, and they're a $50 ticket, guaranteed no matter where you are in the world. It is $50 for a 2-day conference at WordCamp. Then yeah, just submitted to a bunch of other conferences, Laracon included, International PHP Conf, and a lot of other PHP conferences, and other. I think I've spoken at NDC. It's a great way to go around and meet people, and it has definitely helped me, for one, grow my business, and for two, get more comfortable with what the state of the industry is like outside of my little world of contracting.
Mm-hmm.
I actually found that last year for myself. Like this time last year, I didn't have a business. Did a talk at Laracon. Now I do. It's remarkable. I mean, it's fairly obvious looking back on it. You're standing up in front of 300-400 people, and you're talking about a thing with a level of expertise, and that's definitely going to resonate with a group of people. That I think entrepreneurship or starting your own thing or doing even some side hustle to make a little bit of extra money on the side is a difficult thing to kind of bootstrap on Twitter or LinkedIn or whatever you're breaking into that, and particularly those of us who are a bit older who didn't grow up in the Instagram generation and don't really understand personal brand as well as some people in the community do. I find that speaking either at local meetups or at conferences is a great way to kind of see whether or not people would be interested in paying you for the things that if nothing else.
Well, even aside from that, I'm not sure that I've had any direct work come from Laracon or in particular, but just we mentioned the PHP Australia Slack before. There's also a Brisbane Dev Slack, and there's a Rand's Leadership Slack that I'm part of. Just those types of communities where I can go and hang out and just talk shit. That's that's helped me. I don't know if I would say grow my brand, but be known within those communities as the person who knows about the thing who to do this. So just before Laracon 2019, Tim McDonald had decided to step away from freelancing, and because I'd been talking shit with him in PHP Australia, he handed over his clients to me. I'm still working with some of them. From the Brisbane Dev Slack, I was known as the person who knows PHP. So when a local Brisbane company needed someone to go and audit audit the code base of a company that ran Laravel that they were looking at acquiring, my name got thrown up as this is the person who knows about Laravel, who is trustworthy and who seems to know his stuff. So I went and had a poke around at someone's code base in Adelaide, and then it was Michael's company. And when I went and asked in the PHP Australia, it's like, hey, does anyone know anyone who works here? Michael piped up and then went and spoke to his boss, and then I got flack from my end going, are you talking about this to people?
Funny how the world works.
It's kind of an interesting kind of lifting the little lid a little bit. Words today. Lifting the lid a little bit on how that sort of ripple effect tends to work, right? I mean, it very much is a case of like I don't imagine you expected to pick up Tim McDonald's book of clients by just talking, by just being the guy inside that channel, but getting out there and doing those things for no other reason than you want to interact with like-minded people and find some new friends and grow your knowledge. Ultimately ends up turning into changing a freelancing business into a full-blown consultancy.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing. It's the last year and a half I've been contracting, I think, 3 people from PHP Australia. I've been subcontracting work out to them as well. Just because it got to the point where I needed more people to help on certain projects. But yeah, it's definitely I'm terrible with social media. I deleted my Facebook in 2011, 2012, which was just about when I started freelancing because I got sick of it. I've had a Twitter for a long time, and then I forgot it existed for about 5 years, and I only started going back onto it at Laracon 2019 because it seemed like that's where everyone was. LinkedIn is LinkedIn. It's not well suited for people who freelance or run their own thing. I just get constant recruiter spam saying, "Hey Sam, we can see you haven't worked for a while. Would you like this junior JavaScript position?" Or alternatively, "Hey, I can see you've got a company name. Would you like to hire these 8 people who are completely unsuited to your type of work?"
Yeah, you've got Java. You've got JavaScript in your list of skills. Here's a Java position.
Yes.
Ironically, I think we call it Recruiter Book. The sooner LinkedIn wake up to themselves and just rename it Recruiter Book, the better.
Yeah. But yeah, that's the thing. I don't do well on traditional social media. I've got 200-ish followers on Twitter, and it's an effort to post anything there because it feels partly like screaming into the void, and partly like I prefer the feedback of talking crap somewhere where people can't get away from it. I mean, no. So no, I prefer the chat style community, and like the PHP Australia is a great community. It's one of the only group communities I've seen where everyone comes in the morning and says, "Oh, good morning, how's it going?" And it feels very like local community-ish, which can be intimidating to people coming in, I'm sure. But then outside of that, I find finding the area where where you're most comfortable and becoming known there. You don't have to be the expert; you just have to be known as competent. So if all anyone ever saw from me was Sam shoved uh, Lumen into WordPress as a theme, and that's all, I don't think anyone would have been handing me clients. They would have gone, "Well, that guy's an idiot."
Yeah.
Or all the other ones, what have I done? I was getting. I should finish that off. WordPress installable as a uh, LiveWire component for Pulse. That's what I was working on. I got halfway there. But yeah, I've done a bunch of little bits and pieces like that, and obviously the recursive databases that Michael doesn't like talking about.
Do it for the audience. So you submitted to speak at Laracon AU this year on the subject of like shoving SQLite, like entire SQLite databases as binary blobs into MySQL columns or something like that. I was like, I
poor
can't be
man's
party to
multi-tenancy.
Yeah, I've put up with enough of your stuff so far, Sam. There was a line and you just crossed it.
The thing is, it is such a, like, on the face, bizarre, stupid idea, but people have done something similar in the past. And the more I've looked into it, there are potentially actually useful things that can come from it, especially if you have read-heavy databases, which are not written very often. Being able to store a SQLite database somewhere, whether it's in S3 or in MySQL, but you can effectively, if you're using something like Laravel Vapor, you can pull the database out once when the instance boots, and then run that instance running off a local copy of a database. Then it has no read latency to the database. It has, and you don't have to worry about running a massive database instance either, because it's not getting hit very often.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, it's. I mean, it is different because SQLite is a bit of a different animal, but MySQL lets you have JSON data structures which let you do similarly horrific things if you really want to push it.
I use that pretty frequently, and especially with Sparsy's Laravel data package. The latest version has a great little feature where if you have an abstract base class, then you can type that in Eloquent and then use a whole bunch of other different classes that subclass off that, and it will automatically pick the right one and fill in your data. So you can have 3 or 4. So I've been using it with Stripe, for example. I've got 3 or 4 different Stripe products that are effectively polymorphic into a single JSON structure. And depending on the name of the class or the class that I put in there in the first place, it'll automatically pull out the same one. So I can pull models out, and they've all got different data structures connected to them, which are all type safe and properly structured, and I can do the instance of this, and it's not just a blob of JSON data.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah, Laravel gives you that functionality out of the box, to serialize JSON objects or arrays or whatever else into the database, but being able to then pull them out as structured DTOs, as value objects.
And not just structured, but polymorphic structured in from a single column is an amazing little feature.
Yeah, I was actually looking at that right before we jumped on to record this episode.
I have done it manually before that feature existed, and it was a pain.
Yeah.
But there's other cases there too where that kind of thing is just immediately obvious when you're looking at things like an address field, and the typical way of storing addresses is to have half a dozen fields for address line 1, address line 2, state, city, suburb, postcode, and you can create a very real object that represents an address, and then just store it in a single address field, and not have to. Sorry.
If you have an abstract address class, which says these methods must exist for pulling data out of it, then you can subclass that and have a stripe address, which looks different to a zero address, which looks different to all of these different addresses. Store them all in the same field, and they'll get pulled out as a DTO, which gives you consistent access to the things, and it just pulls out the right shape. So
very cool.
It's really cool being able to do that. But yeah,
so recursive database is not as crazy as we first thought.
Yeah, well,
not at that step. The next step, which was using Fuse to provide a file system for MySQL's data directory that was stored in Postgres. So it was SQLite inside MySQL inside Postgres.
For those not watching this on YouTube, Michael's now got his head in his hands and he's shaking his head.
Well, then I also found a Fuse wrapper for SQLite, so I could possibly get the whole thing round back to SQLite if I wanted.
So, well, SQLite's got binary tables. You could put SQLite inside of SQLite, and it's just SQLite all the way down.
So I could do it as binaries, or I could do it as the Fuse file system thing, where it's storing a file system or presenting a file system to user space, which is actually stored on a table. So
you are the manifestation of that Dr. Ian Malcolm meme. Scientists were so preoccupied with whether or not they could, they didn't stop to think whether or not they should.
Yeah. The difference there is, I know I shouldn't be doing this. I know I shouldn't be, and I'm never going to be doing it in production. But I've learned a lot by doing it. Well, okay,
let's walk
the SQLite in MySQL, maybe. But I'm more likely to store it in S3 or some other kind of persistent object store, just because MySQL doesn't do great with storing binary data. And I don't tend to need to query that data. I just need to know where it is.
Yeah, cool.
But to a certain extent, I mean, like the way MySQL stores JSON objects, because I've looked into it, there's a certain size that the document can be under where it stores in the table, and then it splits it out. So it's doing a separate file system read to pull that JSON document out. So already MySQL's internal data structures are doing things that are kind of like that, where it's pulling some data out from somewhere and giving you basic access. Way back in agency days, we used Zope, which is a incredibly dense Python framework, which it had a 6 to 9 month learning curve just to understand the basics of it. But one of the things it came with was the ZODB, which was an object database. You just threw objects into it, and then you could pull out these fully realized objects at any point. but that was slow, so you indexed it. So it was a lot of that influenced a lot of my understanding of the best way to deal with these types of complex data structures and index them and still make them searchable, even though you're not having to invoke the full method or the full data structure.
Cool.
Yeah.
So another thing that we, I suppose, got relatively, you and I got relatively close during the lead up to Laracon AU last year. So I got some insight into the way that you go about talk prep and designing.
Yes, well.
So one of the really surprising things for me this year was that I had a lot of potential first time speakers reach out to me to ask me how I did it as a first time speaker last year. It'd be really cool to sort of get your insights into breaking into the speaker circuit and what that sort of looked like for you as a first time speaker back in the day, and advice you might give to a prospective speaker who wants to break into the circuit.
So obviously when I first started speaking, I started at local meetups because that's a great way to start speaking in front of a small audience where the stakes are quite low. Also, it gets you knowing your local community. So when I first started meetups, I knew nobody. I'd been out of the loop of local community for so long that I kind of showed up and I didn't recognize a single face there. So speaking, I saw as a nice little way to break the ice a little bit. So people at least knew me and had something to talk to me about. So I spent a lot of time with WordPress meetups. I don't really like doing much in WordPress, but I spent a bit of time there because the meetups were accessible and easy to get to, and they were monthly, so they were always looking for speakers. Then PHP meetups and the Laravel meetups when they started up. It's always a good way to start with local meetups. Conferences were scary to begin with because it's a bigger room of people. And there are definitely different types of conferences. Laracon is definitely a standout of a different style of conference. It's single track. Michael does an amazing job of caring about the speakers and making sure everyone's happy. And because even though it is a Laravel conference, it's not just Laravel. It's there's heck, I gave an accessibility talk for the last one. But it covers a whole bunch of other things, and Michael reaches out to people from other communities as well. So we had Loren gave a accessibility talk at the last Laracon as well. And I knew her quite well from Brisbane, but she's not in the PHP Laravel space. She's currently working for Canva, and before that she was doing ThoughtWorks and a whole bunch of other things. So she's .NET space. But Laracon's a great example of how a conference can be done really well to be really good for for a first-time speaker. Other conferences, like I wouldn't suggest anyone try to go and speak at something like NDC as a first point, because it's a 5-day conference. I think 4 tracks over 5 days. It's just so many people, and if you're not part of the group of people who get shipped around to every single NDC conference, you're going to feel like a massive fish out of water until you feel comfortable talking about your thing. The other thing I would suggest is if you're nervous, try to get an early speaking slot for a bunch of reasons. It's ripping off the Band-Aid, but also it gives it until, and I'm sure you understood this entirely, Greg, until you have given your talk, you cannot focus on any of the other talks that are going on, which kind of means most of your conference you're sitting there just stressed about the thing you've got to say. And the more people you see say, the more you start diving into self-doubt. However, everyone's there to see you succeed. No one's coming to a conference. No one is paying $2 to $5 to $600. Some of those larger conferences are three to $4,000 for a ticket to sit there and heckle. They're there to learn. They're there to meet people, and everyone who is seeing someone up on stage is kind of sitting there going, wow, I should listen to this person. They've been picked to stand up on stage and tell me about stuff. Everyone wants you to succeed. So long as you aren't going there and starting to make really controversial statements like push everything to production immediately, or juniors are effectively disabled, or or any of these types of statements. So long as that's not your entire talk, and even if it is, it gives something for people to talk to you about.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
One of the other things that I found that was very, very useful, and you were sort of party to this, is we identified relatively quickly that for whatever reason last year, Brisbane was massively over-indexed on speakers. And I think I was the only first-timer from Brisbane. So because we were all very local, and I'd suggest this to anyone who's finding themselves at Laracon AU this year, if you're a first-timer, find all the people who are sort of geographically local to you, and then find a space and run your talk in front of experienced speakers, because there was definitely some insights. You saw a very early cut of my talk, and the advice you gave me was basically same content but swap it around. So the thing you were talking about last, talk about first, which ultimately was the way that it went. And like part of the reason that advice was given is because I'm very used to speaking to business people and trying to convince business people of things, and not necessarily used to speaking to sort of engineers at individual contributor level and trying to convince them of things. And they're sort of the pacing of the talk was the wrong way around for what we're trying to do. And that's an insight that I would not have gotten had I have just rolled with my original. I think, the talk was probably 10 times better for it, having made that switch. So like there are always people in the speaker group who are always on the circuit, massively experienced, born on the stage kind of thing. And if you can find them locally and, find a little office space somewhere, grab a pizza and a couple of beers and like present to I was actually probably more nervous presenting that to you and Jess than I was presenting it on the stage.
It's a lot more personal, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, you don't stand there on stage in front of 400 people and directly ask them to criticize the thing you just spent a month working on.
I mean, they're going to.
But you also don't care because, like, you can't speak to them all. But when you sort of go into a room with people that you're actually, I want you to tear this apart. I want you to tell me where it's going to be wrong. That can be pretty intimidating. But yeah, that'd be sort of one piece of advice. I think that was originally Stephen Reese Carter's idea, but he ended up getting the spicy flu and couldn't come along.
Yeah. No, Stephen's another great guy who I met originally at WordCamp. He and I had both been presenting at WordCamps for a couple of years running while he was working for WordFence. And then when he moved into the Laravel space, I was like, oh, hey, I know you. So yeah, I've presented with him a few times at WordCamp, at Laracon, he was at the NDC that I spoke at Melbourne. So it's the more you do it, the more you'll start seeing some people pop up here and there. Was it Ben? I can never pronounce his last name. Ben de Cry. He spoke at the 2019 Laracon, and I've seen him pop up because he was doing DevRel. So he was showing up at all these other conferences that I was either attending or speaking at. And I'm like, oh, hey, I recognize him.
Yeah. You find that there's always a cohort of speakers that if you're in Laracon's a good one. You look at Laracon EU and a Laracon AU and a Laracon US and a Laracon India, you'll find that there is going to be some speakers that end up speaking at multiple of them. And a lot of that from a organization perspective is those are known quantities in terms of,
Yeah.
they're going to put on a good talk, that they're going to speak well to the audience and that whatever they're talking about resonates with the audience. But it's always important, I think, from my perspective as well, to mix that up a little bit, to have some new voices and new perspectives and things like that. And mixing and matching like that means that the new voices get the opportunity to present their ideas, surrounded by people with experience that can help them along on that journey as well. So it it can feel a bit intimidating to come into a group like that of, this person's spoken at 3 Laracons or they've spoken at 5 Laracons in different continents and things like that. But remember that at some point in their speaking career, they were also speaking for the first time, entering into a different cohort of experienced speakers. So,
Yeah.
and as you say, everyone wants you to succeed, not just in the audience because they've paid, hundreds of dollars to come and see you speak, but also the other speakers. It's kind of in the back of everyone's mind, I think, but everyone is there to put on a good event for everyone else, and everyone kind of reflects on everyone else in terms of what is presented. So, you know, it's in everyone's best interest to help, keep the level, where it
Yeah.
needs to be. So, and we certainly strive to do that with AU. And I know that Taylor always picks terrific speakers. I know that the guys in the Laracon EU do, and India's done a great job with what they've done in their first 2 years as well. So hopefully that can continue, and we can continue to see new voices and new
Yeah.
perspectives and new people across all of those different events in the coming years as well.
Yeah.
But I
As
think
much as I would love to talk at every single Laracon AU, I am very well aware that there is space for new speakers, and I'm not a big enough name in the community to be the name that draws the crowd either. So,
well, don't sell yourself short though. I think there was, both of your talks. There's been a lot of positive feedback, and
oh
it
yeah,
may
for
not
sure.
necessarily translate to new business for you, but it certainly, as you say, puts your name into people's minds when it comes to that kind of stuff as well. So, some people do it because they want to make a career of speaking. Some people do it because they want to, travel the world. And the only way really to get into a position to do any of that stuff is to put yourself out there and to just do the thing. And
Yeah.
I know that we will certainly help you out in that process in terms of support in speaking and getting there and whatever you need really to just concentrate on giving that presentation.
And some people just like to annoy Michael with terrible talk ideas and see which ones get accepted.
See what sticks. All right,
Or send in bobbleheads.
or bobbleheads. Yes, that was a whole story. That one was. But he sits on my desk next to my Taylor bobblehead every day.
Nice.
Excellent. All right, I'm gonna wrap it there because we've run a bit longer than we would normally with these episodes. But I think there's some good nuggets in there, especially if you like comments or not comments in your code. Yeah, this has been episode number 13 of the Ripples podcast. You can find us on YouTube, on X/Twitter at Ripples FM. You can find me at Michael Dorinda. You can find Greg at Greg Skirman. Sam is at I am Sam Levy, but
I'm Sam Levy.
I'm
No,
Sam Levy, but as he said, he does not tweet much. But we'll put links to the PHP Australia Slack into the show notes as well. You can find us there. But yeah, thank you so much, Sam, for coming on and shooting the shit with us. And, until next time, I have been Michael.
I've been Greg.
And I've been a pain in their ass.
See you, everyone.
Bye.